Welcome to the Education Podcast, where it's all about helping people and organizations unleash their greatness. The Education Podcast features lively discussions.
When they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered.
My heart, it's full of pride for me to be at Tamaiti Samoa.
You don't necessarily need a degree these days. There's so many pathways to success.
Welcome to the Education Podcast. Welcome to today's episode of the Education Podcast. We're diving into the important topic of building a resilient mindset. In a world full of challenges and unexpected obstacles, resilience is the key to not just surviving, but thriving. We are honored to have Richie Aholelei, a true inspiration who juggles multiple roles with unwavering determination and positivity. He is a shareholder at OTP Health Club, which empowers women on their fitness journeys with comprehensive workout and nutrition programs. He also co-owns Fast Fitness in Te Kaupata, a high-intensity gym known for its fun, fast, and results-driven group workouts, which also operates as a 24/7-hour gym. Beyond his fitness ventures, Richie serves as the chairman of Kura Cares Charity, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to bridging economic gaps and breaking the poverty cycle by providing support to families in need. I've been following this guy, Richie, on social media for a long time now, and I'm constantly inspired by his relentless energy and commitment to self-care. Despite his demanding schedule, he constantly makes time for exercise, things like cold water plunges and reading books and other forms of self-care. His ability to balance business, challenges, and personal well-being is a testament to his own resilient mindset. So in today's episode, we will discuss insights and strategies for building a resilient mindset. Whether you're facing a personal or professional challenge, this conversation will equip you with the tools to develop your resilience and achieve your goals. So get ready to be inspired and empowered. Hey, Richie, it's good to have you on the show. Say hello to our listeners and share a great piece of advice that has helped you in your life, brother.
Man, thank you so much, though. That was an amazing intro, man. I almost feel a little bit overwhelmed and blushing. If I was lighter skin tone, I think you'd probably see more pink instead of being on the wall. But no, thank you so much for the amazing intro. Man, yeah, it's obviously the second time that we've had this conversation. Well, third, you came on my podcast and then we had our first one when you invited me first time, and then this is our third time. But man, I don't know, I suppose where to start really. I think the biggest contributing factor that I can think of, I suppose when it comes to resilience, is I was actually telling my wife about this because when you sent me the idea of obviously jumping back on and talking about resilience, I had to really put on my thinking cap to come up with the right answer. And so I suppose everyone's got their own take on resilience. And I personally think my thought process when I was thinking about where resilience comes from, I think it comes from your upbringing. I think when you've been, I suppose, not thrown in the deep end, but I think when you're alone in the world and everyone's got a colorful upbringing, but I had quite a colorful upbringing, so much so that my dad used to, get drunk and tell me that he wanted to kill me kind of thing. And not many people know this as well, but I have been sexually molested as well when I was a kid from someone from school, from my church. This is way back when I think I might have been 6 or 7. So when you're alone, I think a lot of the time you've got no one else to rely on but yourself, and you develop those traits of a fighter. And for me, I think that's where resilience comes from, because when you've got no one else to count on, you've got to count on yourself, and I think it develops that resilience character. I think generally it's something you're not born. I don't think you're born with it, but I think you've actually got to go through adversity and trauma and, testing, character building moments to develop resilience. It's kind of like the biggest thing that I can put it down to is like a muscle. Like obviously, though, you go to the gym, and I always try to let people know that when you're dealing with resilience, it's like a muscle. You got to go to failure to develop more muscle fibers. And it's the exact same thing when it comes to resilience. And I think the hardest thing these days, and I always talk about it, like society, it doesn't allow people to grow through what they go through. You know what I mean? Like there's always like a substitute, or there's always like a net or a safeguard or somewhere. I'm like, so my personal opinion, especially when it comes to trying times, is you've got to let people go through them, support them through it, kind of like spotting, but let them feel that pain, let them go through that stuff, because if they can't test themselves during those times, how will they be able to test themselves when they're alone, when they're going through, when the going gets tough? And so, yeah, my personal opinion about when it comes to resilience, Toko, is that it's developed through the beginning stages of life, like how, your development years, your cognitive development years. I think those are from like 8 to 12 or something like that. Because it was actually funny, me and my wife were talking about it, and we were talking about, she thought that you could actually develop it later on in life, but I don't think so, because I think that as you get older, you've already developed those traits. So you're basically already feeding and adding on to what you already know and are already like, if that makes sense. Where if you are put through adversity at a younger age, you develop those traits earlier. And so, yeah, that was just that was our take on it anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective around nature versus nurture, especially growing up. And, it sounds like you've had a pretty tough childhood and upbringing, but you've learned to deal with those challenges as you grew up and as you got older, right?
Yeah.
So not many people can actually say that. Like, some people have, sad to say, have gone through some of those challenges, but unfortunately have not made it to the other side.
Yeah.
Which is the learning and the growth. And, like you mentioned before, life is full of challenges.
Yeah.
And, it's in resilience, part of it is how do you deal with the challenges? Because you can't, like life is full of them, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you approach it when it does happen?
I was lucky and I was blessed because I got exposed to both extremes. So I think to that degree, I was blessed. So, for instance, I had the crazy upbringing when I was in New Zealand. But then when my parents sent me over to Tonga to live with my grandparents, so I was able to experience quite a crazy life in New Zealand, alcohol. But then I was also able to experience the loving side of what it's like to be in a Pacific family. So I think, luckily, like what you actually identified, there's a lot of people that go through the trauma that I might have gone through and they can't get out of it, where I was able to actually see, this isn't the be all and end all. And I was able to develop some form of empathy, which kind of, I suppose, what's the word? It kind of it smoothens off the edges of that rough edge, like a diamond, instead of me being like a hardened, like, oh, the world's against me, hate the world, F the world kind of thing.
Yeah. I do believe that there are some challenges that people can't overcome by themselves or might need a little bit more professional help. Yeah. Things like trauma, sexual abuse and all that, which is really tough. Yeah. But then you've got other challenges in life that might not be that extreme, but will definitely feel like it's the end of the world when things happen, where you've lost a job, being made redundant, or something in life happens, you've divorce or whatever, it's hard. It's hard. So I do believe also that, people can learn how to overcome some of those obstacles in life as well. Can you talk to us about that? When challenges come, like, what are some ways that people can not just bounce back, but bounce forward?
I think I think when you hit the bottom, there's only one way, and that's up. And so you've always got the biggest thing that I can always think about is making sure that you've got a optimistic mindset, not a pessimistic. Like I cannot surround myself with negative, toxic, half empty cup mindsets. Like that's just something that I can't surround myself with. And so in saying that, my biggest advice would be to surround yourself and make sure that, the other thing is, especially with the mind, like the mind is such a, people don't realize the mind is a very, very, it's a tricky mechanism. And the thing is, you've got to understand that, if you don't control your mind's going to control you. And the thing is, you've always got to constantly remind yourself, because you're always so sorry to go back. Caveman days, we're developed to look for risks and threats, risk and threats. So every time you come across something, your mind is constantly analyzing, like, is that a threat? Is that a threat? Is that And so you've got to understand that your mind is constantly analyzing things 24/7. And you've got to respect the fact that whatever it's coming into, like whatever you're thinking, you've got to remember, is it positive or is it negative? Is this going to be a positive influence on my life, or is this going to be a negative influence on my life? So classic example. So I know instantly when I'm thinking constantly like negatively, because your mind is programmed to look for the negatives, because it's a like what you said, your body's you're made to survive, not thrive. So the biggest thing that I can tell people is to make sure that be analytical with your thoughts. Are they load-bearing thoughts, or are they high-frequency thoughts? Are they complimenting you, or are they complicating you? That's the biggest thing that I can advise people, because seriously, man, like, people fail in life because of their lens, their perception, their lens that they put on. People come to the gym straight away. They've already got a negative mindset instead of an open mindset. People that are successful are the ones that don't overthink. They just commit with an open mind, and eventually they have faith that things will turn out. So always think to yourself, like, my biggest advice is just always think to yourself, optimism, and just think positive. Like, whatever you come into contact with, just think there's a positive out of this. There's a lesson to be learned. Like, I've had situations where businesses have failed, and so I look at it as a positive. Like, you can't go to uni to learn the failings of a business. You've got to actually go through it. You've got to go through it to actually learn. And so everything that you go through in life, you've always just got to think to yourself, I'm going to learn from this. It's a positive. I'm going to move forward. And like, the hardest thing, I'll be honest, man, like, in this current climate, with the economy being so hard right now, with the weather being so bad in Auckland at the moment, crime going through the roof, it's definitely difficult to remain positive. But that's why you've just got to feed your mind. And the other thing that I can encourage people with is start your morning and your day off on the right note. So, like, for instance, like, you already identify, like, I do the cold plunges. So for me, I do cold plunges. I run, I read, because that's my breakfast for my body. That's my breakfast. I look at it as like my breakfast, because you got to remember, like, what you feed your mind is similar to what you feed your body. Like, if you feed it rubbish, you're going to get rubbish. You're only going to see rubbish. Same thing if you eat rubbish all the time, you're only going to see a rubbish body. So that's the hard thing, is like, they all go hand in hand. That's my personal opinion. It goes hand in hand. And my biggest taking is just for people to remember, like, just be mindful of what you're thinking. Like, seriously, like, you've got the power to dictate your lens, and it all stems from how you perceive things and what you're feeding it. And if you're analytical in terms of making sure what you're thinking is correct, or is it wrong, or is it coming from the wrong lens?
I love that. There's a lot of good gems there that you've just shared. I particularly love the part where you talked about around seeing challenges or setbacks as opportunities for growth or something to learn. And, going from caveman to a brave man, and not just surviving, but thriving, takes a bit of work. And I like what you said around looking after the mind and the body, because it's easier to face challenges and adversity when you have a healthy mind and a healthy body, right? Because you're fit, or you're in shape to be able to deal with those challenges.
100%. See, the other thing that people don't realize, so like, a lot of, like, I don't know, I can't speak about depression, and so, but my personal opinion when it comes to depression is when the mind and body, I suppose, they separate, So for instance, what I'm getting at is, when you're sitting in your current state on your couch in your bed doing nothing, your mind continuously grows. It goes and goes and goes. And so there becomes a disconnection between the two. And that's why I think why people say that exercise is the best antidepressant, because you're connecting the two. But the other thing which people don't realize is, when you train, when you run, when you work out, you have to be present. Like, you can't think about the future. You can't think about the past. You have to be thinking about what you're going to do in that moment. which is why personally, I try to tell people the best thing that you can do is something physical. Train, go and run, lift some weights, because your mind, it's constantly working. Like, it's constantly analyzing, it's constantly critiquing, it's constantly criticizing, it's constantly judging, it's constantly comparing. And so when you train and when you work out, you've got literally the only thing that you can do is be present in the moment, and you're connecting the two, because obviously to lift up a weight, you've got to connect your mind and your body towards executing that movement, or when you're running. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a useful tip there, especially for our listeners to understand. It's easier in terms of the body, to look after the body, go to the gym, eating healthy. Like we know we should be doing that, right? And then the other part around looking after the mind, like what's the gym for the mind? And I love the tip around there around, exercising your body is also exercising the mind. If you're able to practice, thinking and being in the present moment and focusing on the now. And, also things like practicing gratitude as well is also useful for the mind. Like it helps you, like what you said, focus on the positive. So you're wiring your brain to be grateful and to feel good about the good things. And I guess that's part of resilience or what helps build resilience is celebrating the victories, being grateful. When you've achieved something and you look back, you're like, man, that was hard, but man, I'm blooming happy that I did it. Like celebrate that. That reinforces resilience.
That's the thing, though. You're completely right, man. Like being able to go through a grind and get that reward at the end of it is one of the biggest accomplishments. And I'll be honest, I'll put my hand up first. Like I'm probably the worst when it comes to celebrating. I don't celebrate wins, which is something I need to work on. Because I'm always thinking to the next, like, where's the next mountain? Where's the next challenge? I'm very challenge oriented. Like I love challenges. But yeah, I think you're right. Like appreciating the wins and appreciating the moment. And it was funny because I remember this saying, and I don't know whether it's completely true, but I do think it is to a degree. They say that depression is overthinking the past. Anxiety is overthinking the future. That's why being in the present is the best way to overcome both mental states.
Yeah, I like that. And I liked how you talked about obviously focusing on the now, but also celebrating the wins. Or when we look at success, like resilience is a tool that we can use to help us achieve success, right? Like, there's that saying, like, when it comes to challenges or failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is a part of success.
Yeah, that's hard out.
Right? 100%. You need those setbacks. You need those. You need those rock bottoms. You need those challenges to help you grow, because those are stepping stones if you learn from it and grow from it.
100%. That's. I think there was a good saying. Was it Denzel Washington or Will Smith? One of them. I think it was Denzel Washington. He said, "Fail forward, fail early, fail fast." Or say there was and there was one more. I'll fail often, and it's so true, though. Like. We've got to learn to love to fail, because that's where the growth happens. That's where success happens. That's where learning happens. And, it's sad because a lot of people are too scared to fail because they're too scared of what people will think of them. Like, to be honest with you, I don't care what people think about me. Like, seriously, like I could not give a rat's ass, no offense. Like for me, I worry about how I feel about myself. Do I care about how I feel about myself? That's number one person that I worry about. And so everything else, like I'm more than happy to give anything a go. And so I think you nailed it on the head, though, when you said about failing, because that's at the other side of failure is where everyone wants to be. It's the reward. That's where the reward is. And that's the saddest thing, is that people are just too scared to fail. And I think it could be due to social media. It could be due to image, because people just, and the other thing is, don't be, don't be restricted to a title. And that's where I think, again, people are too scared to pivot. And that's why they don't fit, but that's why they become stuck in the same position, because they're too stuck on the title that they are. Like, whether you're just a trainer, whether you're just a lawyer, like that doesn't make who you are. That's just a title of what you do, and that's the other thing. I think, like, if people wrap their head around that, they would be so amazed at what they could achieve and what they could do in life. Like, for instance, like I never in a million years would ever thought that I would be a chairperson of a charity. Like that just stemmed from that vision stemmed from my need to help people from doing food drives, and now we run programs. And so not many people would realize that there's actually success when it comes to running a charity. Same thing with the gym. And so, yeah, that would be my biggest advice when it comes to those things, eh?
I love that. I want to touch on that a little bit because, starting a charity, like, it's a great thing that you've achieved there, but I know it wasn't easy to set up. And so with all the other businesses and things that you're a part of, but what kept you going, even though it was hard? What would you say?
I hate failing. Yeah, I hate failing though. That's my biggest, I've got a real, like, so this is another good thing that you've asked. This is a great question. So so talent, and this is not trying to be cliche. Talent is great, but I also think it's a curse. So like when people are talented at a certain skill, because people, when they're talented at a certain skill, you get complacency because they rely on it. But it's that saying, what is it? Hard work beats talent when talent fails to work hard. And I am being blessed that I'm not talented. Like, seriously, like when it comes to bodybuilding, I'm not genetically gifted. Like, I might have a little bit of muscle. When it comes to running, I'm not genetically, like, I've had to develop these things over a prolonged period of time, which is how allowed me to be able to develop that resilient factor. And so when it came to the charity, establishing the charity, it was tough. Like, seriously, like coming up with a charity, like a trust deed, like it was about a year or two process. But because I wasn't born with talent, but had to rely on hard work, it was the one thing that was able to get me through establishing the charity. Because, like I said, if you rely on talent too much, you think that there's always going to be a quick fix when there isn't. Like there is no magic pill a lot of the time. Like, you know what I mean? Though, like, a lot of people it's sad because they think that there's a magic pill to success. It's hard work. Hard work compounds over time. And that's the other thing, like, hard work compounds over time. What that means, guys, is that the more you work, it's a volume game. The more you work and the more hours you put in, the faster you'll get to where you need to be.
I love that. And hearing that you have a passion or hate for failure, but also a passion for success as well. I never heard it from that perspective. And I totally agree in terms of talent can only take you so far. Yeah. Talent alone can only take you so far, but it's the hard work. It's the persistence. And again, that's why resilience is important, because resilience doesn't just rely on talent. Resilience is about hard work and persistence. And I love that you held on. What I'm learning here, you held on to a vision and a goal. Like you said, like, look, it's hard, man. It's hard. This vision, you had a clear vision around this charity, for example. And with that purpose and that passion for that vision, even though it was hard, you never gave up because you held on to that vision. And I think that's a good lesson there for our listeners around, resilience. How to build resilience is having a clear vision of what you want to achieve.
Yeah, though, no, 100%. And I think, again, going back to when we first started this talk about resilience, I think when you've got to only count on yourself, you've got to have a fixed vision that eventually it's going to pay off. Like, this trauma is going to pay off, or it eventually is going to pay off. Because, like, having one of my biggest assets and probably my biggest downfalls is my fixated vision. And I'll be honest, like, I know one of my flaws is that, because I'm more than willing to sacrifice anything to get what I want. And like I said, it's a positive, but there's also major flaws to it. Like, and I'll be honest, like, I'll put my hand on my heart when I say this, like, you go through relationships, like, you go through, there's many things, like, success, like, people think success is amazing. Like, it is, don't get me wrong, but there's always a byproduct. There's always a positive and a negative, pros and cons to whatever you do, a reaction to everything you do, to every action you do. And so with success, like, there's this major setbacks. And so, like, my vision is, like I said, is my biggest asset, but again, it's probably my biggest downfall as well. Yeah.
Well, you're right there around, I think part of resilience is accepting the reality that there's opposition in all things.
Yeah.
Right. there's joy, there's sadness, there's pain,
Yeah.
and all of that, right? And the same thing with success and failure. And success is not just about staying at the top.
Yeah.
It's ongoing,
Yeah.
just like
100%.
life. Yeah.
100%.
You've got to keep growing. You got to keep growing.
Yeah.
You got to keep growing.
And Tony Robbins said a great thing. If you're not progressing, you're dying. You're one of the two. If you're not growing, you're dying. And it's so true. Like, if you're not moving forward, well, you're basically dying, unfortunately, because you're going backwards. And so that's one of my biggest drivers. Like I'm always looking at serving more. I'm always looking at doing more, because I think life is for the living. Like I've got a big saying, life is for the living. You got to live. You can't sit still. Or I generally can't sit still, but I think, if you sit still and let life happen to you instead of for you, you're just going to get miserable. And so that's why I think what you find too, and you're the same, Dog, like some of the most positive people are the people that give the most, because they're so happy. They're so happy to give, and I love giving. And it's crazy though, like it's because of my upbringing. I was back in Tonga, my granddad would pull over to the side, he would pick up people on his back of his ute. So I was brought up around that. And what's insane though is like every time we do a program or every time we give money out of our pocket. So like last week, there was a lady that her father got robbed on a bus, and it was really sad. It was the Islander lady, and I reached out to her. I said to her, "Hey, can you come and see me right now?" I gave her $500 out of my pocket, and then the following day we got approved for a grant for our charity, which is crazy though, And so many times it's happened, and I just wish people would know that. Like, I don't say this as a cliche thing, but the key to living is giving. Like seriously, like the more you give, the more comes back. It's seriously insane. Like it's crazy. It's how it's worked for me. And I think it's that whole universe. Like what you put out there is what you get back. And so I reckon one of the biggest factors for success, is giving, is serving. When you serve, like that's something, like when you serve, you've got no disappointment because you're coming from a lower point of ground. You're not coming from a egotistical point of view. You're coming from a place of service. You're going there to serve. Yeah.
I love that. That's an interesting perspective around resilience, is around serving and helping others. I've never heard that one before, so I really like that. You might be the original author of that book if it does come out. But I love that. And it's about like you said, and it reminds me of Albert Einstein, who said, when you stop learning, you start dying. And it's the same thing. Like happiness, happiness and joy in life comes from a life of growth and progress and giving. It's not about. It's not just about you. It's about helping others.
And see, the other thing is, people don't realize happiness. What's in the word? Happenings. Got to start happening. You got to make things happen. See.
I love that. Action. I love that. Look, you mentioned one key element here around resilience, and that's who you surround yourself with. And you talked about here. Look, resilience is about not. You can't rely on others. You've got to learn how to stand up on your own 2 feet. But there is a factor around, you're a mirror of those that you hang out with. They influence you, right? If in terms of the mindset, and like you said, you don't like surrounding yourself with people with negative mindset or pessimistic. So obviously that's a factor around you making sure that you stay resilient and strong yourself. How important is it to surround ourselves with positive people, and how does that help us build resilience?
Oh, I thought it's really important. I think I forgot what podcast it was what I was listening to, but there was a podcast that basically said, when you surround yourself with high performers, the performance activity of the surroundings increases by 15%. And when you surround yourself with low performers, apparently it influences it by 35%. It's crazy. So it's definitely something that's empirical. Like you need to surround yourself with positive, driven, successful people. And, the hardest thing is that, when you want to achieve anything, I think to myself, you've got to think to yourself, I want to surround myself with the highest, the biggest drivers in that industry or whatever you want to major in. But the other thing that you need to realize as well is that when you surround yourself with high performers or whatever you want to achieve, you've got to make sure that you're either adding value to them, and you've got to make sure that it's a transaction. It's a transaction. And so what I mean is, it can't be always a take, you know what I mean? Like, especially if you're surrounding yourself with positive minded people or driven people, it can't be always take. You've got to add value to that circle as well, whether it's with energy, whether it's with, service, whether it's with skill set, whether it's with, whatever it may be. Just, you've got to make sure that whoever you surround yourself with, you're adding value, because there'll come a point in time where there's certain individuals that will outgrow that group, and you don't want to be the one that's being left behind. You don't want to be the one that's left behind. And the only way to not be left behind is by constantly working on yourself, by educating yourself, by upskilling yourself, by being able to serve more and provide value. Like, and this too, like the amount of people that I've come into contact with that are like 10 times got more wealth than myself, but they're willing to help me, not because, I'm no millionaire, but because of the energy exchange that I can give them. Like they love the fact that I can provide something invaluable that they can't get from anywhere else. And so that's the biggest thing, is like, when you surround yourself with a circle, it's very important, but also make sure that you're providing value to that circle, because what you'll find is that circle will probably get smaller and smaller and probably leave you out. And I've seen that firsthand.
I love that. If you want to surround yourself with positive people and who help you, you've got to be able to help them. And it goes back to your point earlier around serving and service. Yep. And John C. Maxwell said this. He said, if I value you, I will add value to you.
Yeah.
Like, if you're someone that 100%. I value, I'm going to invest my time,
100%.
my resources in supporting you because I value you.
100%. And like, that's a great saying, Dogo, because like, there's so many times, and you probably experienced this too, like where you've invested time in someone and they've gone the completely opposite way, and they've either wasted your time, they've just done the complete 360 and they haven't listened to a word you said, or they've just been ignorant, which is fine. That's, it's human nature. I usually cut my energy off, because it's what you said, though. Like, if you value me, I'll value you as well. And like, if you don't value me, well, I'm not going to value you. Like, it's a transaction. Like, people, I think I look at relationships, they have to be transactional. They have to be transactional, because if they're not transactional, it's going to be a one-way street. And we all know that when there's a one-way transaction, someone's going to lose, someone's going to win. And so whenever that happens, it's never a recipe for success. And so what you give me, I'm going to give in return. And so it has to be transactional. We have to realize that, this is my own personal opinion, but there has to be a transaction constantly. Like, people think that, transaction is a one-sided way of living, but it's not, because as long as you know and identify that there's a transaction occurring, you'll make sure that you're doing whatever you can to add value to that relationship, and vice versa. But you'll also be able to understand, like, hey, I'm not getting that feedback anymore, so I'm going to stop giving you my energy, because I know that I'm worth quite a bit too. And if you're not going to take, I suppose, if you're not going to value it, then why should I value you? But then obviously communication comes into the factor as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very important piece there of advice that you shared, is around, it's not just surrounding yourself with positive people, it's also cutting out those who aren't really helping or adding value to you, and those that you aren't adding value to as well. And, you talk about transactional, and I also see the other word is reciprocation. Reciprocate, you help me, I help you. Right? 100%. I love that. Very 100%. Good. So, look, you do a lot of reading, right? Books and upskilling, which is pretty cool. Any books or courses or podcasts that you could recommend to our listeners around personal development or resilience?
Shucks, there's quite a few, Podcasts, definitely the School of Greatness will be one. That's a great one. Valuetainment, he's got great current events, like what's happening currently. There's one more book. There's a book that I forgot. I'll have to text it to you, though. But there's a few books that I've read that are great. The Alchemist is another one. That's another good one. I like that because it's a real visual manifestation book. But yeah, there's a few books that I like to read. I do like to, I'll be honest, and I'm not political at all, but I do like to read Trump's books, Donald Trump's books, because he's all about business, and I have learned quite a bit from him. But yeah, in terms of podcasts, definitely the School of Greatness and Valuetainment. Those are great listens.
I love it. Well, look, you've
Oh, Think and Grow Rich, though. Think and Grow Rich.
Think and Grow Rich by
Um,
Napoleon.
That's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
I love that book. That book is amazing because it basically talks about manifestation. It talks about, it's a great book, that one.
Good. Well, there's some good recommendations there for our listeners. Thank you so much for sharing that. So that's coming straight from the man himself. Look, before we wrap up this podcast, and thank you so much for being generous with your time and just blessing us with your wisdom. What's one piece of advice or big takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with from this conversation?
I think don't be scared to try and don't be scared to fail. That's the biggest thing that I can have. Well, and like as you get older, I think you develop a not an image, but you develop a perception that you're scared of what people think. But when you're a child, you don't care. And I think my biggest advice would be a child. Like, be a child, be the inner child of who you were as a kid. Because that person was creative, that person didn't care about failing, that person didn't care about what people thought about them. And I reckon you'll be amazed at what you'll be able to achieve when you bring out your inner child. Because like I said, the inner child wasn't scared to fail. Like, come on, like that's where all my injuries happened all when I was a child, because you didn't know what the world was like. You didn't know what the world thought of. And so that's my biggest tips of advice to the world is just bring that inner child out and just think like that. Obviously, don't be irresponsible. But what I mean is in the context of when you want to achieve success or when you want to try something or if you're stuck where you are right now and you want to grow.
Love that. Great piece of advice to finish our podcast. Don't be childish, be childlike. Someone who's humble, someone who's open, willing to learn and try new things. Thank you so much for your time, Richie. Again, talking about resilience and providing some practical and useful tips for our listeners. We're much better for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dole. Thank you for your time.